Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be ranking every book that I've had to read for school over the years, starting off in fourth grade. And coming right up, we have Wonder. This was the first book. Well, technically, this book was read to us. However, I'm going to count it because it's the earliest book that I remember. Wonder, it was a fantastic book, really heartwarming, at least at the time. They took us to watch the movie of it, and we loved that. Awesome book. As far as I can remember, it didn't have any big flaws for me, so I'm going to put this one in S tier. Loved it. Next up is A Long Walk to Water. This book was like a school-wide phenomenon when we read it for some reason. I remember we had to carry jugs of water around the field, and everyone had fun with that. Very interesting book, very eye-opening about what some people have to go through. The book itself, the main story, was very interesting, although the side plot I did not care for. I'd say that this book probably deserves a solid A tier. It was very good, but come to think of it, it wasn't that phenomenal. Next up is Bridge to Terabithia. Oh my god, I hate this book so much. It is the worst thing to ever be put on the face of the planet. So basically, the book is boring for 90% of it, and then at the very end, they're like, oh yeah, one of the main characters died off screen. They're dead now. The main character gets no closure, and then the book ends. That is it. What the hell? That is not how you write a book. That is not how you end a book. This is the bottom, the lowest point literature can go. I hate it. I hope it burns, except I hope it doesn't burn because I want other people to see it, so they have to suffer the way I did. This book is the bane of my existence, and it pisses me off every day just that it exists. Screw this book! Moving on. Bud Not Buddy. This was a pretty average book. I remember it was about a boy who was an orphan, except he knew that his father was alive, and he believed that his father was a musician, and he's trying to find him. And then he eventually finds him, and then it turns out it's actually his grandfather and all. So pretty interesting story. The book itself, the main character was pretty interesting, but most of the journey until the end was somewhat forgettable, except I remember that there was this household of people who he stayed with, and they were awful. That's about all I remember. So yeah, this is a pretty C tier book, but a very high C tier. Very close to B, in fact. Next up is Tuck Everlasting. This was the last book that I had to read for pre-middle school, and it was about this immortal family and this girl who meets them, and it was pretty nice. I remember that everyone got shocked when they killed one of the villains with a shotgun, but other than that, I don't remember too much of it. I remember liking it, though. I'd say this is probably a very low B tier. Kind of a sad ending, but because the girl ends up dying because she doesn't want to live forever, but I'd say it makes sense. So yeah, B tier. Next up, we're on to the middle school books. First one, The K. This was about a racist kid and a black man who are stranded on an island, and the racist kid is blind, and his name's Philip, and there's a cat. I had a really amazing ELA teacher who made this book very enjoyable. I don't think I would have liked it as much if he hadn't been the one teaching it, but because of how great he made it, I'd say it was pretty good. I'm going to put it at B tier. I especially like Timothy. Next up, the other book we read that year, P.S. Longer Letter Later. This is a book about two girls who are sending each other letters, and it's actually formatted that way, which is pretty interesting. The book itself is kind of not really my thing. It's basically they have a falling out because one of them gets poor, and then they make up at the end. Not the worst thing I've ever read, but it's also not the best. I'm going to give it a very low C tier. I might move it down to D tier, actually. It can stay in C for now. Next up, this was a summer reading book, The Breadwinner. It's about a girl in, I think, is it Saudi Arabia? No, Pakistan? I don't know. But she has to pretend to be a boy so she can buy food for her family. And it's pretty interesting. The stakes are high because if she gets caught, she'll be killed. There was a sequel that I started to read, but it didn't interest me that much. But yeah, this book itself was pretty good. Tempted to give it a B, but probably not. I'm going to give it a C tier, high C tier. Nothing But the Truth. This is like a weird anomaly of a book because I distinctly remember reading it, but no one else who I read it with remembers it. None of the teachers remember. It's not in our curriculum. So it's just vanished off the face of the earth after we read it. I actually had to look it up just to make sure that I wasn't crazy in remembering it existed. But yep, here it is. It's about a kid who doesn't want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Yep. So yeah, for considering it was like the lost book or whatever, it is really nothing special. I did not like the main character. I'm going to give it a D tier. Pretty low D tier. Walk Two Moons. Okay, Walk Two Moons, we're on to 7th grade. This was a book that, I really liked for 90% of the way through, and then it had an ending so bad that it put Bridge to Terabithia to shame. And that is a freaking accomplishment. However, unlike Bridge to Terabithia, it wasn't bad for the entirety, and it was actually pretty good for most of it. So that's going to sneak it up into D tier. Now you're probably thinking, D tier? You said you liked it. I'm telling you, the ending was that bad. Her grandmother dies, her mom is dead, and the person who she just found out liked her, who she liked back, suddenly moves away, and then there's nothing else. That is it. Screw this book. Outsiders. This was a book that everyone else in my grade loved, and I just thought was pretty good. It's about these people who kind of live on the tough part of town. Pony Boy, I think, is the main character. It's basically written to kind of show people what some people have to live with and how they have to grow up, bring awareness to that. The book itself, I liked all the characters and the story was pretty interesting, but something about it didn't click with me. I'm going to give it a low B tier. Everyone else loved it, though, so I'm probably going to get crucified for putting it there. Nazi Hunters. All right, this is a summer reading book, and it sounds like it's going to be the coolest thing ever. I mean, it's people who are hunting down evil Nazis and bringing them to justice, except it is the most boring thing I have ever read, ever. Like, Bridge to Terabithia, it was bad, but it's like reading a textbook, but like a boring textbook that's just going on about the same thing. And, then they couldn't find him, and then he got away, and then they started looking again, and then they couldn't find him. How do you make Nazis being hunted down boring? How? Well, ask this book, because it managed to do it. It's not as bad as Bridge to Terabithia, because Bridge to Terabithia is the worst thing ever put on the planet. But this is not that far behind. It's terrible. So I couldn't even finish reading it, but I read most of it. So I switched to Refugee, which is about 3 different stories about immigrant kids trying to flee their countries to find like safer places. And this one was readable, but it wasn't. I didn't like it that much. It was just kind of depressing, to be honest, and I don't like depressing books. So I'm going to kind of put it at the bottom of D tier, but it was way better than Nazi Hunters. Next up, A Christmas Carol. We are into 8th grade. So this was a book that everyone knows the story of. Everyone's seen the movies. I've seen multiple different movies of it, actually. But yeah, it was just as good as those movies were. It's a classic. There's not much to say about it. Everyone knows the story, and the book did not disappoint. So top of A tier right now. Merchant of Venice. We are on to the next book. I was about to say we're on to high school, but not quite yet. We have 2 books left. I forgot. Merchant of Venice. This was my first Shakespeare book, and it was a blast. The book is so freaking horribly written. The plot makes no sense. Every single character is incredibly unlikable. And yet, for some reason, it's like the greatest thing to ever be read. It's just something about hating everyone in the book and not caring who wins makes every interaction so funny. So yeah, this is going in S tier. I love this book. This is incredible. Merchant of Venice. Yeah, wow. Then Roll Thunder, Hear My Cry. This is of all the sad books that we have to read in school, I'd say this is probably my favorite. It's about a black family and a bunch of like black kids who are living in the South, and they have their own land, and they kind of realize how important that is. And then everyone else is being racist. Um, and then one kid named TJ, who's kind of a jerk, ends up dying, and you feel pretty sad. Um, but yeah, screw racism. Don't be racist, kids. But yeah, this was a great book. I was thoroughly, what's the term? Invested the whole way through. I'm going to put it a little bit above Christmas Carol, but these two are neck and neck right now. Next up, summer reading book, Watership Down. This is a book that was really long, and I kind of lost interest in halfway through. However, I think if I were to read it again, I would like it a lot better. But what I did read, I couldn't follow it that well. None of the characters really stood out to me that much. I'm tempted to put it in D tier, but like it does not belong with like Walk Two Moons and Nothing But the Truth. So I'm gonna put it at the very bottom of C tier. But let's just know this is very low C tier. Then Of Mice and Men, we are on to high school finally. Of Mice and Men was probably the shortest book on here. It's about two farmhands, George and Lenny. Lenny is big, strong, but has I don't know if he has autism, but he has something. And George is smaller but pretty smart, and they're best friends. However, George ends up killing some lady. It's an accident. No, not George. Lenny ends up killing some lady, but it's an accident, and he runs away. And George has to come find him, and George ends up being the one to kill him, and it's really sad. Because you can tell how much it hurts George to have to do that. So yeah, it's a very, very good book. I'm going to put it above Long Walk to Water, but below A Christmas Carol, because it was kind of sad. And like I've said before, I don't like sad things. Romeo and Juliet. Speaking of sad things, this book is sad, not in a, it makes you cry away, but sad in a, are you kidding me? There was 1,000 ways this conflict could have been avoided, and yet you chose this path kind of way. However, as much as it's not as godly as The Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Juliet is still a pretty good book. Like, I was expecting it to be terrible, but it was pretty good. The characters were actually kind of likable, which made it a little bit worse than Merchant of Venice, but it was still good. I'd give it very bottom of A. No, very top of B. Ooh. Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Out goes Y-O-U. All right, top of B tier, Romeo and Juliet. And then finally, To Kill a Mockingbird. This is the best school book I have ever read. I love Atticus. I love Scout. I love Jim. I love Boo Radley. The way it kind of portrays racism as being this thing that some people can't see past, and how that's a tragedy. And like for its time, it was super progressive, and now it's just like maybe we shouldn't kill black people, but really the book is beautifully written. Everything about it is interesting. Love the ending. Like a lot of these books that we read in school are pretty interesting and then have terrible endings. Bridge to Terabithia, Walk Two Moons. Sorry, I had something caught in my throat. But yeah, this book was incredible. I loved every second of it. This is the top of S tier. Mysterious Case of the Dog in the Night Time. This was a book about a kid named, I think it was Christopher, who he has autism, and so he sees the world in a different way, and that provides a really interesting point of view to read from. He's not the most likable protagonist there is, but he's pretty interesting. And I'd say that makes... And basically he finds out that his dad killed their neighbor's dog, and that his mom's actually not dead, even though he thought she was, and that she's married to someone else now, and it's a whole mess. But it was pretty interesting. Not the greatest thing out there. I'm going to put it at the very bottom of B. The interesting way that he views the world is probably the best thing about the book. All the Light We Cannot See. This was a summer reading book. Very similar to... It was very similar to Refugee, honestly. It's about this boy and who is kind of like grows up in Nazi Germany, and he ends up being like a spy. And then there's this girl who's blind named Marie-Laure, and she is French, and I think they meet at some point in the book, but I couldn't get that far because the book was beautifully written, but I just could not understand anything that was going on. It kept losing me, and it was like 500 pages. So like I got only a third through, and that's still like 200 something pages into the book. So I'm sorry I couldn't finish it. And I feel really bad because I can tell how good of a book this should be, but I couldn't. I'm going to put this top of D tier. You know, I'm going to put Walk Two Moons higher because at least I could follow what was going on. And then last two books. This was the book I switched to, Fahrenheit 451. We've all heard of it. It's about a world where people kind of lose the idea of reading and they turn to screens and they start burning books. And the main character is like a fireman. And the fireman in this book's job is to burn books, and he kind of starts questioning his morals. And it's very interesting to read about. It has a cool lesson about how important reading is for educating the general populace, and how you shouldn't just ignore things and like burn them so that you don't have to pay attention to them. It's important to address things, all that kind of stuff, attention span. So yeah, this was a much better book. I was able to follow it. It didn't have that many great characters, I'll say that, but the story and the message were enough to carry this book to the tippity top of B tier. You know, I'm putting Romeo and Juliet in A. And then finally, Catcher in the Rye. This is basically Diary of a Wimpy Kid, mature version. It's about Holden Caulfield, who is a teenager, and he's struggling with growing up and change and all that, and he's suffering from a loss that has happened to his family. He lost his brother to cancer. And he's basically going through the world not knowing where to go. He's failed school. He has depression, and it's incredibly relatable to read about. That's partly why I think a lot of people love this book, is because they can connect with the character so much. But yeah, it was a very interesting book. The ending was a little bit lacking. It just felt very cut off and brief. But the book itself was very, very fun to read through. Not fun, because it was kind of sad, but it was very enjoyable to read through. Had a lot of interesting moments. It's cool to see how Holden views the world. I'm going to put this right here. So yeah, this is my official ranking for the books that I've read in school. So it actually seems like I tend to gravitate towards some of the newer books, and that I actually enjoy the majority of the books we read. So I guess it's good to see that. But F, Bridge to Terabithia. This book deserves to die.